All right, welcome everybody. I'm Rabbi Micah Streifer, and I'm the founder of La Asok, and I am thrilled to welcome you and to welcome one of my teachers, Rabbi Naamah Kelman, for today's session, which is called Lighting the Flame Anew, How Israel's Pioneers Reinvented Chanukah. This is part of our annual drop-in series. We offer several classes like this every month that are free and open to the public, that are intended to bring us together to study and engage with Jewish texts and with Judaism in an inclusive and egalitarian and progressive environment like this one. And I'm just thrilled and honored to welcome Rabbi Kelman as our teacher today. Rabbi Naamah Kelman is the first woman ordained as rabbi by the Hebrew Union College in Israel in 1992. She served there for over 3 decades, retiring as dean. She remains committed to pluralism and egalitarianism in Israel, promoting liberal Judaism, coexistence, and a democratic Jewish Israel. I'd love to invite you now to join me in the blessing for study. If you feel comfortable, you can unmute yourself, and let's say this blessing together, and then we'll turn things over to Rabbi Kelman. Please join me. Baruch atah Adonai,
Adonai,
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
haolam,
haolam,
asher kidshanu
v'kidshanu
b'mitzvotav,
b'mitzvotav,
v'tzivanu
v'tzivanu
la'asok
la'asok
b'divrei
b'divrei
Torah.
Torah.
Blessed is the Eternal, whose mitzvot, whose commandments bring us holiness, and who commands us to immerse, to engage in words of Torah. If you have comments or thoughts to share throughout the program, the best thing to do is to raise your hand electronically, which you can do under React at the bottom of the screen. Or if you drop a comment into the chat, I will make sure to keep an eye on those and convey them to Rabbi Kelman as we go along. Rabbi Naamah Kelman, take it away.
Thank you, Rabbi Micah. It's an honor and a joy to be with you this evening. It's 10 o'clock in Jerusalem, not the bright sky that Amy Bigman has put behind her. It's a lovely, it's an evening, cool winter evening in Jerusalem. And as I say, I'm delighted to be with you and share this Torah about Chanukah and the evolution of Chanukah. And I hope it can be somewhat dynamic. And I promise you some time at the end if we don't interact as we go along. So I do want to take a moment also to kind of dedicate this shiur, this lesson, to the light, to expanding the light, to lighting the light, to growing the light, and particularly after the terrible, terrible events in Sydney, Australia, and the death of so many innocents. And it's our Jewish story to face tragedy, and it's also our Jewish story to be resilient and to choose life. So that's what we do. And Hanukkah has a lot to do with that. So as you can see from my opening slide here, that in some ways we'll see that for many centuries, Hanukkah was actually a pretty sleepy holiday. Um, it certainly didn't get the attention it's been getting, maybe you could say, for the past 100 or so years. And that is partially because uh, with the birth of Zionism and the establishment of resettlement of the land of Israel and ultimately the establishment of the state of Israel, um, our chalutzim, our pioneers, when they came, in some ways they came as very much secular, throwing the shackles of the Jewish ghetto and the Jewish lifestyle. And these pioneers were committed to the idea of, instead of bending bending over books, they would be bending over fields. And instead of holding up a Torah, they'd be holding up pitchforks and rifles. And you can already see it in one of the first stamps of kind of the reinvention, where the Maccabees will reemerge in this new Israeli, who's, as you see, he's carrying a hoe or a shovel and wearing a rifle, and he's muscular, very different than Jewish self-perception over the centuries. Having said that, our traditional ritual continues, and I too have a picture of the Western Wall with the full Chanukah. I'll just note that in Israel, we don't use the term menorah, although that was the the candelabra in the temple, which with seven, it was three, six, three and three and one, and the Chanukiah is eight or nine with the shamash, and most Israelis light a Chanukiah, whereas most of you light a menorah, but they're really the same thing. So let's go to the second slide, if we can. And oh, okay, so I brought this as for many Israelis, this is, and for many Jews worldwide, this is Hanukkah, lighting candles. I didn't find a picture with latkes as well, but in Israel, donuts are the big deal, and they too have evolved, and of course playing dreidels. In When we spin the dreidel here, we say Nes Gadol Haya Po, a miracle happened here. When you spin the dreidel, you say Nes Gadol Haya Sham, a great miracle happened there. So that's one, again, another difference, but an important difference between how what we share and what we do a little differently. So okay, so let's go to the next slide, and we're gonna read it, and then I'm gonna ask you all a question. So this was taken from the Reform Movement's website, the Union for Reform Judaism, and they defined Hanukkah, one of the most widely observed Jewish holidays, is an 8-day festival often referred to as the Festival of Lights, and celebrated with candles, food, family, and friends. Each night's added candles bring both literal and symbolic light, augmented by a newer emphasis on charitable donations and a commitment to tikkun olam during the holiday. The holiday, Chanukah, dedication, commemorates the victories of the Maccabees over the Syrian army in 165 BCE and subsequent liberation and rededication of the temple. Today, celebrations of Hanukkah center on lighting the menorah, also called Chanukiah, singing and playing dreidel, and enjoying oil-fried foods. Latkes, sufganiyot, bimioles, fried dough puffs, and keftes de prasas, leek patties. Okay, how many of you would agree that this is the story of Hanukkah? You can raise your hands. If not, is this the story of Hanukkah? Well, it's partially the story, the story of Hanukkah. Um,
Sorry, Rabbi, Cantor Rabbi Jackie Mark said in the chat, not entirely.
okay, thank you, thank you. It is not entirely the full story, um, which just shows how evolve. We evolve over. I like to think of our Jewish holidays as an archaeological tell, which is you archaeologists dig and find layer after layer after layer after layer. And whether it's from the ancient history, and then each generation adds a layer that only enriches the holiday. Okay, so this is not entirely the whole story. And I would say, particularly, um, the addition of an emphasis on tikkun olam. Take a moment to look at classical sources and see if this is an emphasis or even mentioned, and or what's mentioned. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And okay, Al Hanisim. Okay, this is a traditional prayer read on Hanukkah, on Purim, and in the late 20th century, we in the Reform movement added an Al Hanisim, a special prayer of thanksgiving for the miracle for the founding of the State of Israel. Okay? It doesn't exist in necessarily traditional prayer books, but it does in our Israeli Reform movement. So, what are we thanking? So, this is a series of miracles. We thank you for the miracles for the redemption, for the mighty deeds, for the deliverances, for the wonders, for the consolations, and for the wars that you performed for our fathers in those days at this season. Okay? So now we're talking about war on Chanukah. Okay. In the days of Matisyahu, the son of Yochanan the high priest, the Hasmonean and his sons, when the evil Greek kingdom rose up against your people, Israel, to make them forget your Torah and to turn them away from the statutes of your will, you in your abundant mercy stood by them in their time and distress. You defend. You, of course, is God. Okay. So the main actor here in the story is God working with a high priest. So we already see who's not exactly mentioned here that we think about when we think about Hanukkah, and probably the older and chronological storytelling comes from the book of Maccabees. Okay? The book of Maccabees is an older, much older document that tells of the persecution of Jews by the Greeks and how Jews were forbidden over time, even to observe the Shabbat, observe circumcision, observe Jewish holidays, and ultimately they took over the temple where they were sacrificing pigs and all sorts of sacrifices that Jews did not until the Maccabees, in the book of Maccabees, of course, rose up and fought the Greeks and Antiochus, etc., and came to the temple. And we'll see what they say now. We're going to go back to Al Hanisim. And you made yourself a great and sanctified name, and for your people Israel performed a great deliverance and redemption unto this very day. Afterwards, your sons entered the Holy of Holies of your abode, cleaned your temple, purified your sanctuary, and kindled lights in the courtyards of your sanctuary, and designated these 8 days of Hanukkah to thank and praise your great name. Okay, so what do we see that's missing in this his so-called version of the Hanukkah story? Okay, no Maccabees who were soldiers. Okay, they're now high priests. Okay, and certainly not the story of the oil that lasted for 8 days. Okay, we know that we kindled lights and they designated 8 days of Hanukkah, probably, most likely, because they had been forbidden from observing the holiday of Sukkot, and therefore this became a later version of this idea that we didn't have Sukkot, okay, we're going to make Hanukkah 8 days. So, okay, this is another version of the story, but as you can see, elements are missing. Okay. And who's the main savior here? God. God acts. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay. So now this is even more interesting. Hundreds of years later, in the Gemara, in the Talmud, okay, no mention of Hanukkah in the Mishnah, which is codified in 200 CE. And hundreds of years later, no mention. Hanukkah is not mentioned. Okay? And probably Al Hanisim might be a Mishnaic text. No one knows exactly, but it certainly wasn't mentioned in the Mishnah, and only in the tractate of Shabbat, in the middle of a discussion of wicks, which wicks should one use, there's a discussion of Hanukkah. And the sages taught the basic mitzvah of Hanukkah is each day to have a light kindled by a person, the head of the household, for himself and his household. And the Mahadrin, those who add, who make the mitzvah even greater, kindle a light for each and every one in the household. And what lights were they kindling then? Little oil lamps, okay, with wicks. They didn't have the beautiful Chanukiot that we have made from gold, from silver, from ceramics, and or candles, of course. They're talking about wicks in actual oil. Okay? Now there's a disagreement of the two houses that often disagreed. Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagree as to the nature of that adjustment. Beit Shammai says on the first day one kindles 8 lights, and from there on gradually decrease the number of lights until on the last day of Chanukah he kindles 1 light. Beit Hillel says on the first day one kindles 1 light, and with Aaron, this is of course what we all practice. Okay. And Ula said they were two Amoraim in the West Eretz who disagreed with this dispute. Now they're rabbis arguing, okay, trying to understand why these two great sages disagreed. And one said, I hope you're following me, the reason for Beit Shammai's opinion is that the number of light corresponds to the incoming days, the future. On the first day, 8 days remain, and one kindles 8 lights, and etc., etc. The reason Beit Hillel's opinion is that the number of lights corresponds to the outgoing days. Each day, the number of lights corresponds to the number of days of Hanukkah that were already observed. And one said that the reason Beit Shammai's opinion is that the number of lights correspond to the bulls of the festival. Remember Sukkot, that this was perhaps a later version of Sukkot. 13 were sacrifices, but the reason why Hillel is going to win, the bottom line here, one elevates to a higher level of sanctity, and one does not downgrade. Ma'alin bekodesh, we go up in holiness and sanctity. Okay, so we all know we light one on day one, and we go for 8 days. Okay, the last day, all 8. So this is the first mention, but we still don't know anything about Hanukkah, do we? Like, okay, so let's go further on in the Gemara in the Talmud, pages later, Shabbat 23. Suddenly someone asks, what is Hanukkah? What are you talking about? Wicks? You're talking about candles, wicks, and when you light? No, no, no. What is this holiday anyway? Why are the lights kindled on Hanukkah? And the Gemara answers, the sages taught in, and now we from another source, okay, Megillah Ta'anit, on the 25th of Kislev, the days of Hanukkah are 8. One may not eulogize on them, and one may not fast on them, meaning it's a holiday. What is the reason? Okay, now let's read carefully. When the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils that were in the sanctuary by touching them. And when the Hasmonean monarchy overcame them and emerged victorious over them, they searched and found only one cruse of oil that was placed with the seal of the high priest, undisturbed by the Greeks. Now remember, they were sacrificing pig and who knows what, and they managed to find one cruse that hadn't been touched by non-Jews, making it not usable. And there was sufficient oil there to light the candelabrum, the menorah, for only one day. A miracle occurred. And they lit the candelabrum, the menorah, for 8 days. The next year, the sages instituted those days and made them holidays with the recitation of Hallel, the big prayer of thanksgiving that we say all 8 days in the morning prayer in Shacharit, and special thanksgiving al hanisim that we add to the grace after meals and part of the Amidah, the standing prayer. Okay, wow. So wait a minute. First, we kind of learned a version of what is Hanukkah from al hanisim with Matisyahu and the high priest. No mention of Maccabees, no mention of oil. Now we have a version, the rabbis write hundreds of years later, which basically no mention, no Maccabees, okay, no Maccabees, okay, and suddenly there's a miracle of the cruse of oil, of which God not only did, okay, we understood from Al Hanisim that God gave us strength, God gave us courage, God allowed us to purify the temple and we created, but here suddenly you have the miracle again, And I'm going to emphasize this word on purpose. Okay, so we have the URJ's version that we read. We have Al Hanisim. We have the Talmud's version. Okay. And as I say, basically throughout the centuries, Jews observed this holiday mostly at home, um, in the synagogue a little bit, and in some ways it was centuries of a kind of quiet. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay. Any questions? I can't follow the chat, so Micah, if there's anything that's been unclear, okay, let me know. Okay, fast forward, and we're back in Israel, and I assume in some of the more observant or religiously more orthodox neighborhoods, certainly in Jerusalem. Uh, Another idea that comes out of the Talmud later is that we light our menorah, our Chanukah, and we place it so people can see in order to declare, share the miracle. This is a typical gate or frontage of a Jerusalem building, and where you see people have lit their candles. And by the way, they're not candles. These are oil with wicks. Okay, they're special Chanukiot, which people put outside their homes. And throughout Hanukkah, people come from all over Israel to and all of Jerusalem to see these lights lit in the on porches, on front fences of people to share, advertise, to declare the miracle. And what's the miracle? Okay, again, we got a few versions of the miracle. But everyone can agree, and here again, with the return to the land of Israel and the Chalutzim, the pioneers will begin to redefine Hanukkah once again and even emphasize, create a huge inventory of children's songs, of Hanukkah songs. And one I think we can all agree on is Banu Choshech Legaresh. We are here to, if you see you can see in the English, we've come to expel darkness. Okay? In our hands, Banu Choshech Legaresh, Biyadenu Or Va'esh. Okay, in our hands are light and fire. Each person, Kol Achad Hu Or Katan, every single human being, no Maccabees, no Hasmoneans, no high priest, each one of us, right? Each one, each person, okay, is a small light, and together we make a great light. Go away darkness, away obscurity, make way for the light. Okay, and those of you who might be familiar with this song, it's written, it's the melody that's familiar to many Israelis, almost sounds like a marching song. Banu choshech ligarish v'yadenu orva ish. Okay, a lot of onomatopoeia there. Okay, surah choshech. Okay, so it's a march. Okay, each one of us can now hold up our fire, our torches, and get rid of the darkness. Okay, no God, no Maccabees, no Hasmoneans. Micah,
Yes,
yeah,
I just, as you're talking about this, I'm realizing kind of the dissonance between the words and the melody. That, Hanukkah has this very militaristic side that we saw in the Al Hanisim, God is fighting wars, or the Book of
yeah,
Maccabees, it's us, the Jews are fighting wars. And then there's this, what I think of as like the sort of primordial light and darkness. It's the dark time of year. Every religion has a light festival at this time of year, right? And I'm sure that those are different layers of meaning that are sort of layered on top of each other. And then when you sang the song, and I know these words, but I don't really know the song because I didn't grow up in Israel. but I was aware that the words here are all about sort of like dispelling the darkness with light. But the melody was very war militaristic Maccabees, and it was a funny dissonance between the two.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I actually taught this in a different setting this week. And I called a friend of mine who's an expert on Hasidic nigunim. And I said to him, give me a beautiful nigun. This is such a beautiful song. And exactly, I was going to say, it comes, we're in the darkest days of the year, certainly in Israel and not worldwide, but right, it's such beautiful words. Why does it get this military? So what I'm trying to explain is the early pioneers take back Chanukah and turn everyone into a fighter and you know, into a Maccabee, and we're going to do this. Each one of us is going to hold the fire, okay? We're going to hold the fire and light the light. But you're right. So if we got any, I see we have a few cantors on this call. I welcome you to re right. I would love you to rewrite it I think in a way that speaks to us. Each and every one of us is a light, and I think we're all feeling the need that each and every one of us is light, and together, kulanu or etan, together we must fight darkness together. So you're absolutely right, and so again, so this combination of you walk the streets of Jerusalem by 5 o'clock and it's getting dark, you see all these lights, in different neighborhoods. And in some places, not necessarily these houses, they're singing this song. Okay, so now we're going to focus very much on the Chalutzim and this reinterpretation. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, so now you have Israelis are going to spend Hanukkah dressed up as Maccabees. Okay, and what are these little kids holding? They're not holding fire, they're actually holding swords. And they're somewhere in Modi'in, where Judah Maccabee, the family, came from, right? And they go out to the woods and they pretend they're fighting, but here we've put the kind of shields and swords back in the hands of Israelis. Okay, so as I say, it's not just a a festival of lights; is also a festival of the military victory. Okay, so let's go back. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, Micah, next slide. Okay. Okay. Now, if we didn't think it was military victory enough, perhaps one of the most famous songs of the Chalutzim, of the pioneers, is this song called Anu Nosim Lapidim. Okay, we are holding up torches, okay? Anu Nosim Lapidim, we carry torches in dark nights, the paths shine beneath our feet, and he whose heart thirsts for this light, let him lift his eyes and his heart to our light and come. Nes lo kara lanu, pach shemen lo matzanu. A miracle did not happen because we did not find any oil. Okay, this is almost sacrilege, but this is a classical pioneering song. There was no miracle. That cruise of oils is Baba Mises. Okay? No. We, to the depth we went, the mountains we climbed, the hidden springs of light we discovered. A miracle did not happen to us because we did not find any oil. You sing it again. In the rock we carved until blood, and there was light. Okay? Nes lo karalanu. Okay? Um, no dreidels, okay? No singing to God, Al Hanisim or Hallel. We're the ones. We held the torch. We fought to get freedom and independence and recreate and fight for a brand new state for the Jewish people. So there's really the song that in my mind captures perhaps the most extreme of the pioneers, the Chalutzim reinventing Chanukah, is this song. But okay, now I want to go back a little bit. We go to the next slide and talk about how when the Chalutzim first came to Israel, young people, very young people, and very young people, and they left their families, and in many cases, they knew they may never see their families again. They left, as I said at the beginning, they left these shtetls or these Jewish neighborhoods where they felt Jews were passive. Uh, Jews and Zionism for the early Chalutzim is reclaiming the land of Israel, Jewish independence, and independence in every way, agriculture, um, protecting ourselves. And when they began, particularly in the kibbutzim, to say, well, how are we going to be Jews? They did ask that question. And what holidays might we celebrate? So, actually, maybe I shouldn't have shown the sign because I often ask a group, what holiday do you think they would celebrate, as they come together, these communes? And often people say, well, Passover, of course, that's the Jewish holiday. And guess what? Passover for the Chalutzim was one of the most painful holidays. That's when they missed their families so much. And at the beginning, we have texts of the kibbutzim where they created these kind of humoristic. Why is tonight different than any other night? Because we're no longer with our families, and because we celebrate the. At the beginning, they to cope with the loss, they were somewhat humoristic, and it took almost a generation to finally put together, which is that could be another lecture, Micah, how the Chalutzim celebrated Passover and how they recreated the meaning of four cups and you name it. So what they did celebrate immediately was they redefined Chanukah and Shavuot, the holiday of Shavuot. And here you see, until today, kibbutzim reenacting, bringing the first fruits, not to the temple anymore, but bringing it to the kibbutz central meeting place, and where children wear wreaths on their heads, because we know from a description in the Mishnah that's how people came in on a parade to Jerusalem with wreaths and with the first fruits. We know that. We actually know that's what the Israelites did. Of course, now they're tractors and all sorts of things. But what didn't they talk about on Shavuot, the Chalutzim? They did not mention the giving of the Torah. They did not celebrate that part, okay? They only celebrated the agricultural aspects of Shavuot. So here you have, in those first generations, the celebration of Chanukah as more militaristic, nationalistic, you could say, freedom, independence, and Shavuot becomes a celebration of we've reclaimed the land, and we now grow, we're back to growing the seven species, wheat and barley and figs and you name it. Okay. Those are of course, a lot of this has changed now. And if we have time, we'll get to that. Next slide. Moving right along. Okay. So over time, I think some of this military emphasis is going to shift and be softened once the state of Israel is established. And I went through the kibbutz archival materials, some that can be found on the internet, and I saw that one kibbutz actually decided to dedicate each night to a different value or a different idea. So reading the Hebrew is actually quite beautiful, and it's very much in rhyme, in Hebrew rhyme. And so, for example, the first night is dedicated to the light of the Maccabees, because that's tradition in kibbutz, right? In honor of the few standing against the many, in honor of miracles and all the heroism, in honor of the blaze and the fire of the bonfires. This is the light that carries with the torch race from the fields of Modi'im to the days of the future. Okay? Okay, they're not running up to the temple, okay? But they remember the Maccabees who brought light and freedom back to Jerusalem and to the Israelites. Okay, that's light number one. And the second light is for the Chalutzim, the pioneers who made gardens bloom, sowed in tears, reaped in the fields, took roots and planted foundations. This is a light that walks like a pillar of cloud, leading the way, knowing where. Okay, so they're also, they see how they jump from the Maccabees all the way to the Chalutzim. Centuries passed between them. But for these kibbutzim, these secular socialist kibbutzim who don't pray, right? Oh, I should say, um, when in reclaiming of Chanukah and Shavuot, they did not reclaim Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. Okay, there were kibbutzim known for having big feasts and balls and parties on Yom Kippur. They threw out synagogue ritual completely, the early pioneers, and replaced it with these ideas of, communal living, shared child rearing, and a new vision of what it means to be a Jew in a sovereign state. And as I say, you have to protect yourself, you have to feed yourself. Okay, so the Maccabees, centuries later, the pioneers. Okay, next, of course, the third light is the light of our children, in honor of the generation growing up before our eyes, in honor of counting the deeds of the fathers, carrying dreams and hopes in their hearts. This is a light that gives faith to fulfill an old legend with new forces. Okay, so again, very beautiful and simple Hebrew that rhymes. Next slide. Okay. Okay, now light number four. This is the immigrants who came to over the now it's the story of Israel in honor of those who overcame many obstacles, in honor of open gates and hands, to gather exiles from all four winds. This is a light that comes from the end of the foreign land, parallel and promising the face of tomorrow. Okay? Next, the fifth candle is the light of creation. Okay? What is reestablishing, the state unless we have a rich cultural life in honor of the sculptor and the poet and the singer and the master of dance, and in honor of those who extend their hand with the brush? This is a light that paints the face of time and beautiful prayer of sounds and shades. Okay, so again, a lot of you would say the playlist, the beloved songs of Israel come from the Chalutzim, come from the Kibbutzim, although it's changed dramatically, of course. But some of what we'd call, the golden songs of the establishment of the state come out of this kibbutz spirit. The sixth candle is the light of the home, on the grace of the place built by our hands in honor of belonging and closeness. And the Shabbat together, boys and girls, this is the light that takes you and me together in a true circle. Okay, just 2 more days. The light of human freedom. And now, I thought you'd find this interesting because now they're spreading the light and they're going to spread the light to human freedom. Okay, no longer Maccabees just fighting for Jewish independence. Now that we've established ourselves, we have a responsibility beyond our kibbutz, beyond our lives in this nation state. Human freedom, in honor of the conscience whose voice is not silenced, in honor of the right to freedom to know, to think, to choose, to understand, to be, to love. This is a light of the guardian that will never end, the sand, the sea, and the prayer of man. And some of you probably recognize they're quoting from Chana Senesh here. Okay? Eli, Eli. Of course, they don't say Eli, Eli, oh God, my God, but they do quote Chana Senesh here. And lastly is the light of peace. The eighth candle is the light of peace, the light that will burst out of the dream in honor of the doves on the towers of the walls, in honor of the songs of the post-war period, This is a light that burns for us night and day. How longing we hope for peace. So I couldn't get the date when this was written, but it certainly applies to today and kind of summarizing this kind of socialist, democratic, Jewish, secular spirit of kibbutzim that honors um, some of the past and, of course, prays for more universal ideas. Okay, so we keep going along. I'm mindful of our time. We have a few more, some slides. Okay, I just thought you would enjoy seeing this, that I got this from the Union of Reform Judaism, that this is now a tradition or a new ritual that's happening in the US as well, where someone can pose this, inspired by Kwanzaa, a festival celebrated by many Black Americans, in which each day of the holiday is dedicated to a different core principle. My family and I dedicate the 8 nights of Chanukah to a different value exemplified by biblical Jewish women. Now, this woman who did it was inspired by Kwanzaa. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. I guess she didn't know about the kibbutzim that have been doing this as well. And it's a beautiful dedication. Um, so, um, so the first night is justice for Devorah, who was the great judge. The second night is peace, Sarah bat Asher, who brought peace and comfort to Jacob by telling him gently through song that his son Joseph had not been killed. The third night is sisterhood. It was Rachel, not her father, who ensured that her sister Leah would have the honor of being Jacob's first spouse. Loving kindness is Rivka, showed exceptional kindness at the well to Isaac's servant Eliezer. The next night is compassion. Miriam had a vision that her mother would give birth to a child destined to become a great leader. She shared her vision. Okay, we know the story of Miriam, and she, of course, shepherded the people from bondage to freedom. Next slide, we have a few more, I believe. And the next night, the seventh night is Pharaoh's daughter who rescued Moses from the water and raised him under her father's nose and the biological mother, Yocheved, um, yeah. So yes, these, as Rabbi Micah is sharing, these are very much based on midrashim, stories about stories in the Torah. But again, I love the fact that this Amy Soul took these values to dedicate each night and found the woman to match. So this is a great counter to the Maccabees, to the militarism. Joy, Sarah demonstrated great joy of having a child at the age of 90. And news reminds us to celebrate the positive when it occurs. Love, the last night is love. Lot's wife, Edith, which is again a midrash, that this was her name. We don't know her name. This is often the case with biblical women. So she looked back to her children and brother escaping Sodom. Okay. Yes, someone's writing very similar to the songs of the 60s. So here, Amy Soul. So we can thank her. We can thank her. I thought this was a lovely, because most of us don't really dedicate each night to a different value. So as I said, if you look at Jewish holidays as this kind of tell, and each generation brings a different meaning. Um, yes, you're welcome to have these slides. Um, Here's someone who's a modern day feminist, Amy, who's made each light correspond to a Jewish value. And she talk about Mahadrin, make it even, embellishing it more by finding the 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 character of the biblical woman who matches these values. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we've talked a lot about um, how holidays have evolved. And what I did want to share with you is we now live in an era where there are gourmet sufganiyot. There is now competitions in Israel. And if you look at the box of, you can't imagine what was once these just powdered sugar and jelly donuts have now become the most unbelievable lemon meringue, cheesecake, you name it. Um, the amazing, amazing donuts, and to the point where, yeah, to the point where I don't want to even think about how many calories they are. So you have these simple ones as one side and these gourmet donuts. And of course, every year the local like Jerusalem newspaper will tell you where the places to get, the top 10 suganiot bakeries in the city. I happen to live above one of them, so uh, I pace myself. Um, my favorite being the lemon meringue one. Okay. So in some ways, um, in Israel now, in general Israel, the lights are big. And I do want to say that this year, and in and even though we enter the holiday with great sadness, since the war is mostly over and almost all the hostages have returned, except one who is still, we're waiting for his return to be buried in Israel. There's been a great sense of the need to celebrate. I really feel that people have, kind of restricted themselves for a while, and there's so much going on. I can't even keep track of how many events. And because it's so close to Christmas, um, there are Christmas fairs all over Jerusalem and Nazareth. And Haifa is well known for its Festival of Festivals, where Christmas trees and lights are everywhere. And there's almost the illusion that we're truly all celebrating these lights together. Um, so as I say, there's and singing festivals and so much going on in museums and you name it, all over Israel. This is the week where schools are completely off, starting tomorrow. The first day of Chanukah is celebrated in schools for Chanukah events, and then you're let off for a whole week, and this is their winter vacation. So, right. Okay, next slide, please. One more slide. Yep. Okay. So, this session is not at all tackling the December dilemma, which I think has been an issue, a real issue for American Jews. How we celebrate Hanukkah has become a lot more about gift giving and funny sweaters and matching pajamas. It's kind of imitating, or am I allowed to say appropriating some of the Christmas, uh, um, practices, secular practices, and American Jews have adopted some of this. And I just thought I'd share a wonderful story with everybody, is that we have a newly ordained rabbi who's a Jew by choice, and she converted to Judaism 6 years ago in college, and slowly but surely um, decided to become a rabbi. And she was about to begin her year in Israel at Hebrew Union College, where Rabbi Micah attended as well. And that was the year of COVID, and the year was canceled for coming to Israel, but the program continued on Zoom. And I was then the dean of Hebrew Union College, and I got to mentor her. She had moved out of New York back to her family's, her childhood room, because so many people left New York. She couldn't afford to be a full-time student, and she moved back to her childhood home in a suburb of Pittsburgh. And she woke up, her parents are active Catholics, very supportive of her journey. And she woke up Christmas morning to see that her present was tefillin. They had put under the Christmas tree phylacteries, the what we wrap ourselves with, to show their total love and support of her. When she showed me this, I said, only in America is this possible. this kind of beautiful, um, acceptance of her and her choice, and the fact that she was home for Christmas. So anyway, I just thought I would share that with you as an interesting how we combine. And I'm not saying this syncretistically. They did not do this, but as a true way of embracing the two traditions. Okay, last slide, I believe. My last slide. Okay. So look carefully at this slide. And I'm, in a sense, going back to the very first slide. You see the 8 nights of Chanukah and most of the menorahs, most of the Chanukiot, but one is one night. Okay? Some Israelis are adopting the idea of lighting the Chanukiah according to Hillel, but putting one according to Shammai. And why is this? In the era of such divisiveness and so much arguing and so much polarization, maybe if we light both, we'll remember that Jews argue for the sake of Torah, not to tear each other apart. And Hillel and Shammai, for the most part, although there are other stories about them, are held up as models of rabbis who differed. But as the Talmud said, they still married each other, they still ate at each other's homes, they still argued, and they lived together. And I think I don't know if this will catch on, but I'm just offering it as a kind of interesting new twist, you know, in these days of, as I say, such polarization and multiple meanings. I think I hope I've managed to transmit to you these multiple, multi-layered meanings that all live together in this one holiday of you know, the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans, high priests. Oh, I will say one thing that why did the rabbis de-emphasize the role of the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans? It's not just because they wanted to re-emphasize the role of God. The Hasmoneans themselves, over time, became corrupt. Okay, they became corrupt. And they too became Hellenized, and were and the rabbis had to take them out of the story, and that's why the cruise of oil became so important because they needed to find new meaning as these Hasmoneans had become, as I said, corrupt themselves. And if we live in a sense of God is not corruptible, so God is the true, savior in this story, as opposed to humans who can be corrupted. So that's why the de-emphasis on, and if I was talking about the Chalutzim earlier, when they did reestablish Passover, God's name is not in their Haggadah. They take out God from the Haggadah and put Moses back. Um, so I hope the fact that these different interpretations can live together, and we get back to that simple song of, we can go back to Banu Choshech Ligaresh, we can go back, Rabbi Micah, to what I think is the essence, the pure essence. Okay, let's see if we can find that one. Yeah. Yep. Right. To me, this is the essence of the holiday, that each one of us is obligated to light the light of the Chanukiah, of the menorah, but more importantly, to bring the light to this world, to see the light of every human being and enhance it and enrich it and expand it. And despite so much darkness we've been experiencing over these years, we have to remember, and Hanukkah is the good way to remember, that we live with much darkness, but we are capable, we are able to bring light into the world. So happy Hanukkah, everybody. We have a few minutes for questions. Yeah, or
So
comments.
So first of all, let me say thank you, a huge thank you to Rabbi Naamah Kelman. If there are questions, comments, please put them into the chat or raise your hand. Before we call on Amalia, I just want to point out to everybody that if you want to do a little more Hanukkah study, please join me this Thursday at our weekly Tikva through text, and I just put the link in the chat, where I'm going to also be digging a little more deeply as well into the idea of increasing in light, increasing in holiness. Let's go to Amalia, whose hand is up.
Hi. So, Rebbe, you can hear from my accent that I'm an Israeli, and
Okay.
I really
And your
enjoyed.
name. And your name.
Hi, Amalia Ken. And I really enjoyed your presentation. Since I retired, I study a lot. I mean, I'm also was a Judaic librarian, so some of the things are new, but I want to add something. You mentioned that in the diaspora we call it Chanukah menorah, and we the Israelis call it Chanukah. The Academy for the Hebrew Language, האקדמיה ללשון העברית, just wrote this little explanation that in diaspora it was called Chanukah menorah because we know that the menorah is only 3 and 1 shamash, and the daughter of the Eliezer ben Yehuda found in Ladino Chanukah, and she entered it to the Israeli population, and it became popular. So that I didn't know before, but I thought it's interesting that it came from Ladino to the Israeli culture.
Ah, yes. Okay. Thank you. Toda.
Interesting, מעניין. Yes.
Yeah. Right. No, I was trying to explain to a mostly American crowd why Israelis would not use that word menorah at all. It's kind of foreign to them.
It bothered me
Even though it's Hebrew.
For years, I used to correct my students in the Hebrew school
Right.
that it's not menorah, it's Chanukah, but now at least I know the reason.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
always say every Chanukiah is a menorah, but not every menorah is a Chanukiah.
Right.
Correct.
Any last questions, anyone, or comments? Well, let me say one more time a huge thank you to Rabbi Naamah Kelman. It's such a pleasure to be able to study with you again. We had a
Thank
few
you.
rabbis and cantors on the call with us today. I know people were excited to be able to learn from you again. I hope to see some of you on Thursday at Tikva through text. And I'll wish you all a Chag Chanukah Sameach. May we be able to bring a little light into this dark world in all the ways that we are working together to help build shalom and to help build coexistence in the world. Thanks
Amen.
again.